coming. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Do you know this lecture was originally going to be done in February? Do you remember what happened in February?
Yeah.
Remember Snowmageddon? Whoa, this was actually going to be a great talk, like a relief to look at nature, but now it's what, 85? This is the opposite of February. So this is just, nature's talking to us everywhere we go. And I think there's, so there's a reason for this talk. I think we all need to kind of focus on nature in so many ways in our daily lives. But Kira Baum, Dr. Kira Baum, naturopathic doctor, EAMP, which is the new term for East Asian medicine practitioner, aka acupuncturist, teacher, lecturer, mother, woman extraordinaire, is going to kind of guide us through this journey. And you know, she doesn't need an introduction, but she's just awesome. She's been with us for quite some time now. If you want to meet with her for consultations, please let me know. And without further ado, Kira Baum.
Hi. Well, I am so excited to talk with you guys about this topic in particular. Not only because nature is kind of all around us and waking up right now and so beautiful, but also because this is my very favorite topic, and it's kind of been a guiding principle in my life. My love of nature has helped me to choose my career. It's how I chose my house to be next to the biggest park in Seattle. Ooh. And yeah, just kind of and it's even how I think about parenting. I'm very mindful not to overschedule my kids so that they get these big chunks of unstructured time outside. I think it's important for both little and big people. And so, let's jump in. To give you a little taste of what we'll be talking about today, I wanted to start off with a video.
Do you find yourself longing for the apocalypse? I was looking for a reason to live. Hi. Are you feeling tired, irritable, stressed out? Well, you might consider nature.
From the people that brought you Getting Outside comes prescription strength nature, a non-harmful medication shown to relieve the crippling symptoms of modern life.
Nature's recommended for humans of all ages, and it's great for pets too.
Nature can reduce cynicism, meaninglessness, anal retentiveness, and murderous rage. In clinical studies, nature is proven to decrease work-induced catatonia.
Caution. Nature may cause you to slow down, quit your job, or seriously consider what the you're doing with your life.
If you are overly cynical, jaded, or emotionally numb, you may need to increase your dose of nature. Do you have trouble being even mildly uncomfortable? Nature may not be right for you. Side effects may include spontaneous euphoria, taking yourself less seriously, and being in a good mood for no apparent reason.
So ask your doctor if nature is right for you.
Okay, and the answer is?
Let's have a meet and greet with a plant. So I brought some that may be familiar to some of you here, but I will invite you to commune with this plant with new eyes and just starting to use your senses with it so you can feel it and you can certainly smell it. And you can even taste this one. And just start getting curious about the unique signature of this plant. What makes it unique? What sets it apart? And start asking yourself questions like, what properties might this plant have? Might it be cooling or warming? And if you want to just imagine that you are someone living in pre-science days, say in the Middle Ages, maybe you're an herbalist. See if you can just start to play with how this plant might be beneficial for me. what organ affinities might it have? What healing effects might it have in the body? And it's okay to just guess, right? To not know. It's just a fun way.
Nose.
Right? So here is the monograph for, what is this plant? Rosemary, yeah, Rosemarinus officinalis. And some of its principal actions include being an anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and something called nootropic, which means it helps our cognition. And this is a way that herbalists back in the day would try to figure out how plants could help people. They would use something called the doctrine of signatures. And this is actually a little image from the Middle Ages of a different plant, eyebright, and how the flowers resemble the eye. And eyebright has come to be used for various ailments of the eye. So the doctrine of signatures, but don't worry, I'm not setting out to make you guys into herbalists. I'm starting from here to give you an experience of communing with nature. And science is telling us that communing with nature in various ways is incredibly beneficial for us. And these are just some of the effects that time in nature has on us and our well-being. It was actually hard for me to whittle things down. So we'll see how far we get today. My aim is not only to give you some of the science, but also to give you some of the experience of diving in to nature. Oh, yes, right, I forgot. I didn't have a pointer when I practiced at home. So a lot of the science is actually coming out of Japan, where both people and researchers have embraced this idea of nature therapy. They call it forest bathing, which I think sounds even more poetic. Shinrin Yoku. And they are very clear that being in nature is not a hike. You don't go up necessarily, and it's not a race. You don't go fast. Typically, this is how they might set up an experiment. They will have people be outdoors anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, covering a mile. And the effects are amazing. It is incredibly soothing to our nervous system. Looking at or walking through a forest significantly lowers both diastolic and systolic blood pressure, much more than spending the same amount of time walking through a city. And interestingly, looking at counts too. So if you're on a bench or looking out the window at that gorgeous oak tree over there, that counts. This is what it looks like when they run an experiment on Shinroku in Japan. So you can see people just hanging out in the forest. And one study there showed that just 20 minutes outdoors lowered cortisol levels by 13%. So you don't have to be out there for 4 hours, although it's probably going to have an even greater benefit to do that. But 20 minutes. In another study, 90 minutes outdoors, and again they compared forest time to an equivalent amount of time in the city. Reduced activity in a particular part of the brain called, and this is a mouthful, I practiced this at home, but I'm messing it up now. Subgenual prefrontal cortex. And this is a region of the brain that's been linked to anxiety and mood disorders. So there's more activity there in somebody that might have those. And so this area was just not lighting up as much. And what people reported was that they were experiencing fewer ruminating thoughts. Anybody know what those are? It's like that inside voice gets stuck on a loop, on repeat. And nature can break that loop. Also, people reported fewer self-critical thoughts, which is nice because most of our internal voices are kind of mean. I'm going to skip this actually to do our tree meditation a little later on. I wanted to talk about how we need this more than ever now. Many of us live in cities. In the US, the bulk of our population lives in cities, 63% of us. And on the West Coast, that's even more dramatic. 75% of us live in the cities in the US. And cities comprise only 3.5% of land mass. And you don't need to look far. You can look at the construction in South Lake Union to see that green space is not necessarily a priority with urbanization, but it should be. Trees do so much for cities. Trees make us more patient. People who wait for buses, looking out at trees, perceive the wait time to be less. Yeah. People who are walking from point A to B, if there are trees along their way, they perceive the distance to be less. Apartment buildings with windows that look out onto greenery have half the crime rate of apartments that don't have that function. So we should be fighting for green spaces for our cities, and we should be fighting for green time for ourselves. Here are some more ways that nature can help. I found these to be surprising. I kind of figured that nature would help with stress, but I didn't know that it might help with immune function. So again, out of Japan, they found that time in nature, specifically around trees, increased our natural killer cell activity. This is one aspect of our immune system. 3 days in the forest increased natural killer cell activity by 50%. And the beneficial effect could last up to 1 month. So you could really recharge with a weekend in nature and have that last you. One mechanism that's been proposed for this is that all plants, think about your little rosemary, all plants, including trees, produce these substances called phytoncides. These are aromatic oils that plants produce in order to fight off pathogens. And it appears that those aromatic oils help us too. So that's what's been suggested to induce this increase in natural killer cell activity. And here's another interesting thing. Did you guys know that nearsightedness is on a dramatic rise? So much so that it's projected that in the year 2050, half of the world's population will be nearsighted and will require glasses. And the biggest reason, and this is kind of widely agreed upon, environmental factors, specifically less time outdoors, for two reasons. One, you might guess at. We don't have as much practice looking at things far away anymore. Most of our lives have us looking close, right? At screens perhaps, no more than 2 feet away. But the other reason is interesting. Exposure to light, especially in our early years, exposure to light, especially the type of light found outdoors, helps shape our eye. It helps keep our eye from growing too long. So in this particular study, looking at eye growth over an 18-month-long period, they found that in those people exposed to more light outside, there was less axial growth. Their eye didn't get as long. And the longer an eye, the more nearsighted the eye's owner. So kind of interesting there. One thing that I read from this research was the recommendation that children should spend at least 60 minutes outside to lower their risk. That less than an hour outside for children would put them at higher risk for nearsightedness. And the same researcher also said that for people already experiencing some degree of nearsightedness, exposure to the outdoors for them could help mitigate the increase of their or the progression of their nearsightedness. By the way, if you guys are interested in delving more deeply into any of the points I raised here, let me know. I have the research studies that I looked at in my PowerPoint. I'm happy to pass those along. Here's a really interesting one. Nature helps us heal after our operations, after our surgeries. They took a group of folks who had had their gallbladders removed, and they assigned half of them to rooms with a view, to rooms with windows that looked out onto trees. And you know what happened? Those patients had shorter post-operative hospital days, so they could leave the hospital sooner. They required fewer pain medications, and they were also nicer to their nurses. They didn't get as many negative reviews from their nurses. Kind of cool. This is a pretty simple thing. Pretty simple, yet pretty hard. Americans, the average person spends less than 5% of their time outdoors. 90% of our time is spent in buildings and cars. And a big chunk of our time now is spent with screens. So I was looking at, maybe some of you have gotten surveys from this company. I know we have. They look at TV and screen habits, and they'll put out these surveys periodically, the Nielsen company. And so I was looking at their latest one, and they said that what they found was that the typical adult spent around 10 hours per day interacting with screens. And this is screens of all kinds, but what a dramatic change, right, from where we have been for the bulk of our evolution. Just for fun, the report threw out all of these numbers for how we spend our week, and I made this little pie chart to try to put it in perspective. So they said that in a typical week, we spend 50 hours with devices. So that's about this amount of the pie chart. And of course, if we say work 8 hours a day, that's there. And if we sleep 7 hours a day, then that's the gray part. And that leaves a very small amount of the pie for personal care, things like eating, washing, dressing, preparing your food, and then an even lesser chunk for other things, friends, family, hobbies, nature. So nature gets squeezed in somewhere into this little sliver for most of us. And hopefully you and I can fight in this kind of a grassroots way to make that sliver bigger. So lots of information, but it basically is represented in the graph. Exercising outdoors. This is one of the researchers that I was reading about and looking at her studies. She says, despite the fitness industry boom, we are not seeing changes in the national physical activity level. So perhaps gyms are not the answer. And from my perspective, I'll add, perhaps nature is. Here's what we know. Exercising outdoors is more efficient. Runners and cyclists spent more calories outdoors than their counterparts who did the same activity indoors. You do more of it when you're outdoors without realizing it. So this is an observational study of 700-ish older adults, and what they found was that the older adults that reported spending more time outside also they monitored their activity levels, and what they found was those folks were getting more vigorous exercise. They weren't reporting it, but they were doing it when they were outdoors. And participants in this particular study were more likely to stick with their exercise if they were doing it outdoors. And, cherry on top, they found it more pleasurable. And there's actually an interesting example in the history books of how medicine and nature were combined in these institutions called sanitariums. There were less of them here, but many, many of them in Europe and in my home country, Ukraine. This was common practice. So the way that these came about was kind of funny. It was when tuberculosis was on the rise, and it was believed that fresh air was very helpful for TB. So they built these beautiful institutions, and going there was physician prescribed, and that's how it began. But as it evolved, people would go there for all sorts of things. Anything from gout to arthritis would bring people to these sanitariums, because also what was happening is industrialization. And so these overworked factory workers in polluted cities were looking for reasons to escape. They're fascinating, and some of these buildings are still around. And they actually, in their heyday, they were kind of like today's conference centers and resorts and golf courses. They were the places to be. And actually, my sister, I don't think they went with me, but my sister and dad went to sanitariums in our neck of the woods, and they were prescribed walking barefoot on rocks, and drinking water from mineral springs, and all sorts of fun stuff. So what should we do? Should we fight for green spaces in our cities? Should we run from our cities to get the green space or bring it here? Should we fight for more greenery in our hospitals, in our streets? Or do we fight for more of this green space in our own lives? And you can choose all of the above, of course. But really what we need to do is recognize the incredible importance of nature in our lives. This symbiosis evolved over many, many, many years. And it's really in modern times that we've let it go. And we need to bring it back. So let's talk about how. And you get to talk with your neighbors about how. Talk about the parts of this talk that really stood out to you and what you're wishing for yourself in regards to your connection with the natural world. I'm going to give us just a few minutes to talk with each other before we reconvene and talk as a group. I'm so excited and happy to hear that you have ideas and thoughts about this. Yeah, this topic is very alive and I think needed in modern times. And slowing down to kind of nature time might feel boring or strange or any number of things, and that's what makes it a good exercise. So that we can, when we need it, repace to nature. Actually, let's do that meditation now, if you wouldn't mind. So start by just becoming comfortable in your chair and planting both of your feet on the ground. And if they don't touch all the way, that's okay. Just planting some portion of your foot on the ground. And imagining sprouting roots through the soles of your feet, sprouting roots that reach through the 5 floors of the polyclinic and continue going through our parking lots, our parking garage, and eventually feel those roots hitting the rich, loamy earth that's below us. And reaching down as far as you would like. Reaching to the earth's core if you'd like, or stopping when you feel a bit of warmth. And now imagining yourself growing up, growing branches that reach through the 5th floor and up through the 9 floors of the polyclinic, and eventually unfurl into the warm sky above. And gently sway to the pace of your breath. And just feeling that connection to both the earth below you and the sky above you. Just feeling perfectly balanced between earth and sky. Rooted below and flexible above. And just feeling into how it might be to be a tree. What might time be like for a tree? What might humans look like to a tree? And taking the next couple of breaths to do whatever you'd like to do from the perspective of a tree. And slowly, at your own pace, coming back to yourself in the chair. And this room and this place, and opening your eyes when you're ready to keep going. And sometimes when we don't have the natural world around us, we can still create it within us. So if you find that your days are quite heavily scheduled, then you might need to schedule in nature time. Put it on your calendar, carve out a time for it. And as we saw, screens have really stolen a lot of our day. So if you can limit some of that screen time, you might find that you find some of that time for the natural world. So play around with it. This is one of my favorite quotes from Walt Whitman. Now I see the secret to making of the best persons. It is to grow in the open air and to eat and sleep with the earth. So whatever that looks like for you. And I also wanted to show you, you guys are the first to see this, but with my husband's help, I've been working on a website to further develop these ideas, and it's called Nature Plunge. So I wanted to show it to you because it just went live about 20 minutes before I came here.
Wow.
So it's going to be two-part. If you press on Take the Plunge, it will bring you to a blog. And the blog, each entry will have text, but it will also have, and this one doesn't have it because we're still working on it. But each entry will also have a little 5 to 10 minute guided meditation that's kind of riffing off of the theme of the entry. So I think, did this, oh. Yeah. So there's one that's actually similar to the meditation that you and I just did. It's talking about mature trees and how being around mature trees is good for us. And there's a little meditation that is actually about kind of making friends with a tree. So if it at all interests you, if this topic interests you and you want to do more with it, then you might want to remember about Nature Plunge, and you can sign up. There's a place to sign up for my newsletter when this gets built out more. But that pretty much ends the information that I wanted to share with you today. Were there other questions or comments that you had around this and around nature in your life?
How did this get started for you? How has this grown for you?
Oh, that's a great question.
Where did the roots start?
Right, yeah. I think the roots started pretty early on in my childhood, and maybe a lot of us can share this experience. I spent a lot of time just running around as a kid. We were fortunate to live next to a park for the bulk of my growing up, and I spent a lot of time there. And that was also kind of juxtaposed with gardening with my grandmother. So I think those two really embedded this love of the outdoors for me. And I knew that I wanted to do something in the field of medicine, so then I needed to figure out how to merge those two, and that's been kind of a journey. And you probably had a similar journey.
Actually, I was just thinking about something else. A long time ago, 3 or 4 years ago, we had a talk by Kate Wells, who's a hypnotherapist. And she was so great, we had her back, so she did several sessions with our group here. And I remember one person in the audience said that, oh, I can't be hypnotized. And she was saying, no, this is not Las Vegas, walk like a duck, ha-ha stuff. This is, a lot of you can actually, hypnotize yourself. And she said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you're driving down I-5 and you miss your exit. Because you're kind of like daydreaming, kind of, you're not really daydreaming, you're not crashing, but you're just kind of, your brain's somewhere else. And she said, that's kind of what I'm talking about. And she said, that was interesting. And when you're talking about this forest, and Anne was asking a question, I thought, you can kind of go out there and lose track of where you are and what you're doing and what the time is, your sense of time. And I just thought of that right away. It's kind of like this little nature hypnotherapy.
Yeah. And one thing that I was reading about was this idea of entrainment, where we match our pacing to those around us. So we can see it like babies, right, will start to breathe and their heartbeat will match their mother's when they're close. Or we really respond to light and dark patterns to set up our own circadian rhythms. Well, there's an entrainment that happens when we're out in the natural world. We start to repace to that rhythm. Thank you so much for coming and for breathing life into this topic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I hope you all take the plunge and hop online and maybe think about these things as you drive home tonight too, or walk home out into your garden, look at your trees. I love that you name your trees. But stick around if you want to ask individual questions, but have a great evening. Thanks for coming.